It was the summer of 1969, 1 year after the murder of Bobby Kennedy, who had been Kennedy's family great political hope, after the assassination of his older brother John in 1963. Edward Ted Kennedy was the fourth and only living son of the fiercely ambitious and controlling father Joseph, and Joseph's White House aspirations rested on Edward now. John F. Kennedy and Bobby had both been hugely popular figures. They were considered American royalty. Edward knew he could never hope to live up to the immortalized images of his brother, but he did still have plenty of influential support and backing in the political world, and was already senator for Massachusetts. On one fateful night of Friday 18 July 1969, Edward and a few cronies were throwing a party on Chappaquiddick, a small island that was part of the Martha's Vineyard Resort where the Kennedys had their summer residence. The party was for the Boiler Room Girls, the women who had worked behind the scenes on Bobby's 1968 White House campaign. The gathering was to thank them all. For reasons that will never be known for certain, Edward drove one of the girls, 28-year-old Mary Jo Kopechne, towards the island ferry at around 11 p.m. No one knows why they were together or why they decided to leave the party. Some people have hinted at a fling, others believe she felt unwell and had asked Edward to drive her to the boat to go back to the hotel. This was the version of events that Edward would keep to. Mary Jo had left her handbag at the party. What we do know is that Edward took a wrong turn and found himself on a dirt road with a turn onto a one-lane bridge that had no railings. The car plummeted off the bridge into a large tidal pond below. Ted managed to escape the car, but Mary Jo would perish in the car. He later claimed he tried several times to save her life. Edward had gone back to the party to get two friends who would go to help him, and both had also tried to rescue Mary Jo from the car. But Edward then went back to the hotel without telling the police about the accident or that Mary Jo was still in the car underwater. Edward was concussed and in shock. This was accepted by the court, and surprisingly the majority of the American people accepted that too. Not only did he escape jail time for leaving the scene of an accident, he also got to keep his senatorship and served the USA people for another 40 years, though his presidential hopes were over. Of course, many who are dubious about his reason for not alerting any police. Many believe Edward had been drink driving and needed to sober up, or he had just panicked because he knew what a damning effect this incident would have on his career. Most dreadful for all, Mary Jo may have still been possibly alive for hours before finally dying. Some reports are conflicting. Some believe there is some evidence she suffocated rather than drowning, as she had a small pocket of air to breathe in. If Edward had gone straight to the police, there is a possibility she would have survived, and Edward's career would then have been largely unscathed. Once Jack and Bobby had both been assassinated and Edward was the last presidential possibility, we can only imagine the fury and disappointment Joseph felt after the events of Chappaquiddick. By this point Joseph had suffered a stroke, and though his mind remained keen, he was physically disabled and he could barely speak. It is hard to believe Edward had just left the scene after such a tragic accident. Edward never made it to the White House, however he had many fans and supporters who admired him as an effective politician. Edward had died in 2009 from cancer. Edward was outspoken and clearly wanted to introduce a universal healthcare program and supported civil rights education. Whether that makes up for the events of Chappaquiddick is another story.